Welcome back, everybody. Today on Grift or Gifted, we are diving deep into the world of Ben Shapiro.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, he's everywhere you look these days, books, podcasts, movies.
A man's a media empire unto himself, it seems.
And he's definitely not shy about sharing his opinions, that's for sure.
That's an understatement if I've ever heard one.
So is he a brilliant mind or just a master manipulator? Is he changing the world or just trying to make a buck?
That's what we're here to figure out. We're going to be digging into everything from his early days at Breitbart to his current role as Mr. Conservative Media Mogul.
We've got articles, we've got think pieces, we've got court documents. Even we're going to be looking at his Wikipedia page.
You know, it's serious business when Wikipedia gets involved.
So let's jump right in. One of the most fascinating things about Ben Shapiro's story is the sheer amount of controversy that follows him.
Yeah, it seems like everywhere he goes, there's drama following close behind.
And that drama isn't just limited to, clashes with people on the left, even within conservative circles. He's managed to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, just look at his very public and very messy feud with Candace Owens.
Oh, yeah, that was explosive. I mean, they went at it on Twitter over Israel, accusations of anti-Semitism flying back and forth.
It was definitely a low point in terms of civil discourse, and it really highlights how even within a seemingly unified group like conservative media, there can be some deep fault lines.
So Owens basically accused Shapiro of being part of this secret Jewish cabal controlling Hollywood and promoting, blood rituals and all sorts of really disturbing anti-Semitic tropes.
And unfortunately, those tropes have a long and ugly history rooted in centuries of prejudice and conspiracy theories.
And Shapiro didn't exactly take the high road in response. He called Owens' stances disgraceful and criticized her so-called faux sophistication.
And then after being let go from the Daily Wire, Owens tweeted this very cryptic message. You cannot serve both God and money.
Which a lot of people saw as a direct shot at Shapiro, and yet another instance of invoking those harmful stereotypes about Jews and money.
And to really understand how those stereotypes play into this whole situation, we need to step back and look at the historical context. These ideas didn't just come out of nowhere. They're part of a larger pattern of prejudice that's been used to justify all sorts of horrible things.
And this wasn't an isolated incident either. Back in 2022, Shapiro went after Owens for retweeting this post that was basically straight-up anti-Zionist propaganda.
Yeah, for those who might not be familiar with the term Zionism, refers to the movement advocating for a Jewish state in Israel, which has obviously become a very complex and controversial topic.
And it gets to the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is something we're going to be delving into more deeply later on.
But for now, let's rewind a bit and look at Shapiro's early days at Breitbart News, a website known for its far-right and often inflammatory content.
Yeah, he joined back in 2012 and eventually became their editor-at-large, right as the site was really gaining traction within right-wing circles.
And it was during this time that one of his most controversial articles was published. In 2013, he wrote this piece alleging that Chuck Hagel, who was Obama's nominee for Secretary of Defense, had received campaign contributions from a group called Friends of Hamas.
Whoa.
Yeah. Pretty explosive stuff, right? The only problem is that it was completely made up. There's zero evidence that this group even existed.
So what happened? Did he just get bad information? Or was this a deliberate attempt to smear Hagel?
Well, Shapiro later admitted that he regretted publishing the story and said he didn't have enough evidence to support the claim, which really raises some questions about his journalistic integrity and, the potential harm of rushing to publish something without really vetting it first.
Especially when it plays into these existing biases and fears, it can have a real impact.
Absolutely. And then just a few years later, Shapiro resigned from Breitbart in the wake of that whole incident where a reporter was allegedly assaulted by Corey Lewandowski, Trump's campaign manager at the time.
That was another wild story.
Shapiro basically said that Breitbart sided with the Trump campaign over their own reporter, and that's why he walked.
It's interesting, though, because Shapiro's been pretty vocal in his criticism of Facebook supposedly censoring conservative voices.
Right.
But his own company, the Daily Wire, actually dominated Facebook news feeds for a good while.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of a contradiction there.
Makes you wonder if maybe he's not always playing it straight with his audience.
So was the Daily Wire's success due to genuine popularity, or was it more about, gaming the algorithms and exploiting Facebook's system?
Tough to say for sure, but it's something to keep in mind as we go deeper into his story.
It seems like there's a pattern emerging here, a blend of undeniable talent, strategic maneuvering, and a whole lot of controversy.
Yeah, and to really unpack that, We need to take a closer look at Shapiro's own views and some of the public feuds he's been involved in over the years.
So at his core, Shapiro identifies as a conservative.
Mm.
He's a big proponent of free markets, limited government, traditional values.
You know the whole shebang.
He's consistently opposed to abortion, gun control, universal health care, and pretty much anything he sees as government overreach.
And he's not exactly known for being subtle about it.
No, he's definitely got that in-your-face style that's both attracted and repelled audiences.
Some people see him as this fearless truth teller. Others see him as arrogant and dismissive.
And that brings us to his trademark phrase, facts don't care about your feelings.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. You either love it or you hate it.
His fans see it as this refreshing rejection of emotionalism, a call for logic and reason, but his critics see it as a way to shut down any kind of legitimate concerns, especially from marginalized groups.
It's a perfect example of how the exact same words can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on your perspective.
And it speaks to this larger challenge we're facing today, this growing ideological divide where everyone's just retreating into their own echo chambers.
So is Shapiro really interested in reasoned debate? Or is he just trying to score points and preach to his already converted audience?
Yeah. That's a question we're going to keep coming back to as we dig deeper into his work.
And to do that, we're going to have to dissect some of his most famous arguments, particularly those presented in his Debunked series, where he takes on what he calls left-wing myths.
Examining those claims is going to be crucial in determining if he's really a champion of logic or just a master manipulator.
And to understand those claims, we need to take a closer look at the rhetorical strategies Shapiro uses and what kind of biases might be at play.
So when we're talking about Shapiro's rhetorical strategies, one thing that really jumps out is that rapid-fire delivery.
Oh yeah, he's like a machine gun of words.
It can be pretty overwhelming, especially if you're not used to it.
And it definitely makes him sound super confident, like he knows exactly what he's talking about.
Which is a strategy in itself, right? Because if you sound confident, people are more likely to believe you, even if they don't understand everything you're saying.
It's like he's just bombarding you with all these facts and figures, and there's barely any time to even process it, let alone formulate a counter-argument.
Right, and then you add in that whole facts don't care about your feelings thing, and it creates this dynamic where if you disagree with him, you're automatically labeled as irrational or emotional.
Which, hey, it's going to be pretty dismissive, especially when we're talking about issues that have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. I mean, there are definitely times when emotions are valid and important to consider. And that's where things get a little more complicated with Shapiro.
How so?
Well, while he does use facts and figures, he also tends to cherry pick the ones that support his point and leave out the ones that don't.
So it's not necessarily about outright lying, but more about framing things in a certain way.
Exactly. It's about creating a narrative that fits his worldview, even if it means simplifying things or leaving out important context.
So it's all about the spin.
In a way, yeah. He's very good at presenting things in a way that makes his arguments sound airtight, even if they're actually full of holes.
So let's look at a concrete example. His arguments against raising the minimum wage always come to mind.
Oh, yeah. He loves to trot out those studies that show job losses after minimum wage increases.
Right. His whole point is that it actually hurts the very people it's supposed to help.
Which, again, is a very compelling argument on the surface.
But isn't there more to the story? Don't some studies show that a higher minimum wage can actually be beneficial in the long run?
There are definitely studies that show that, but Shapiro tends to focus on those short-term negative impacts and kind of glosses over the potential long-term benefits.
Like what?
Well, for example, increased wages can lead to more consumer spending, which could then boost the economy and ultimately lead to more jobs down the line.
And it could also help people get out of poverty, reduce reliance on government assistance, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And it can also have positive impacts on employee morale, reduce turnover, even boost productivity as companies invest more in their workers.
So it's not as simple as minimum wage goes up, jobs disappear.
Right. It's a much more complex issue with a lot of different factors to consider. And by only focusing on one side of the argument, Shapiro is really doing a disservice to his audience.
So it's important to be aware of that selective presentation of information.
Always. Even when you're dealing with so-called facts, you have to think critically and consider the source and the potential biases involved.
And speaking of shifting gears, let's talk about Shapiro's foray into Hollywood.
Yeah, that was a surprising move. I mean, he's been railing against Hollywood for years, calling it a bastion of liberal elitism.
So what's he doing making movies? Is this some kind of elaborate troll?
Well, there's definitely an ideological component to it. He clearly wants to create content that reflects his worldview and challenges what he sees as the dominant liberal narrative in entertainment.
But it's also a smart business move,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Hollywood is a huge industry with a massive audience.
Absolutely. And Shapiro is nothing if not a savvy businessman. He sees this as an opportunity to reach a whole new audience and further build his media empire.
So it's not just about making movies, it's about creating a whole alternative ecosystem of conservative-friendly content.
Exactly. He wants to build something that can compete with and maybe even overtake the mainstream media.
And what kind of movies are they making? What's their big strategy here?
Well, so far they've focused on promoting traditional values and pushing back against what they see as the excesses of the left. What is a Woman is probably their most well-known film.
That one stirred up a lot of controversy.
Yeah, it basically questions the whole concept of transgender identity and presents a very specific and some would say harmful view of gender,
And it definitely got people talking.
which seems to be the point, right? Generate controversy, attract attention, and solidify Shapiro's position as a leader in the culture wars.
But is that a sustainable strategy in the long run? I mean,
Well,
constantly picking fights and alienating people.
it's hard to say. It definitely works in the short term, gets people riled up, but it also risks further polarizing society and making it even harder to have any kind of meaningful dialogue.
And it raises questions about the role of ideology in art and entertainment. Are these films really about telling stories? Or are they just vehicles for political messaging?
That's a question each viewer has to answer for themselves, but there's no doubt that Shapiro sees filmmaking as another powerful tool for advancing his worldview.
And given his track record so far, it would be foolish to underestimate his ability to make a splash in Hollywood.
The question is, what kind of splash will it be? Will it be something positive that promotes understanding and dialogue, or will it just deepen the existing divides?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something we'll be exploring further as we move forward. So we've talked about Shapiro's beliefs, his tactics, his media empire, but the real question is, does any of it actually matter? Is he actually influencing people?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, how do you measure influence?
It's hard to quantify for sure.
But you can't deny he's got a huge following, especially among younger conservatives.
Yeah, his podcast is consistently ranked as one of the most popular, and he always draws these massive crowds when he speaks at colleges.
Although those appearances often come with a lot of baggage. Protests, security concerns.
Yeah, he's become this lightning rod for both praise and criticism.
It's like he embodies a very specific brand of conservatism that really gets people fired up one way or the other.
And his influence goes beyond just his direct audience. His arguments, his talking points, they end up filtering into the larger political discourse.
Right. Even if you've never listened to his podcast or watched one of his videos, you've probably encountered his ideas in some form, whether it's online or on cable news.
He's definitely part of the conversation, whether we like it or not.
Exactly. So love him or hate him, there's no denying that Ben Shapiro is a force to be reckoned with.
He's built this media empire. He's become a leading voice on the right. But, as with anyone who's that polarizing, it's important to look at his work critically.
Right, to question his assumptions, to look for the other side of the story. That's something we've tried to do throughout this whole deep dive.
Our goal here isn't to tell you what to think, but to give you the tools to think for yourself.
We want you to walk away from this with a deeper understanding of who Ben Shapiro is, what he believes, and how he operates.
Now, before we wrap things up, there's one more aspect of Shapiro's story that we need to address, and it's a tough one.
The connection between his rhetoric and the 2017 Quebec City mosque shooting.
Yeah, this is a sensitive topic, and we need to approach it with caution and respect for the victims.
What we know is that the shooter, Alexandre Bissonnette, was a known follower of far-right figures online, and that includes Ben Shapiro.
Police actually found evidence that Bissonnette had visited Shapiro's Twitter feed multiple times in the weeks leading up to the attack.
And while there's no evidence directly linking Shapiro's words to the shooting, it does raise some very difficult questions about the responsibility of public figures.
Especially when their rhetoric seems to resonate with people who hold extremist views.
To be clear, Shapiro has condemned the attack unequivocally, but the fact remains that his views on Islam and immigration, for example, can be very inflammatory.
And that kind of rhetoric can contribute to a climate of fear and intolerance, which can, in some cases, lead to violence.
It's a complex issue, and it's a conversation we need to have as a society, especially in this age of social media where extremist content can spread so easily.
So as we come to the end of our deep dive into Ben Shapiro, we're left with more questions than answers.
Mm.
Is he a brilliant provocateur, a dangerous demagogue, or something in between?
Is he truly gifted, or is he just a really good grifter?
The truth is probably somewhere in the gray area.
What's clear is that he's a product of our times. He reflects the anxieties, the divisions, the anger that we're seeing play out all around us.
And understanding his rise, his influence, his tactics, it's crucial if you want to have any hope of bridging those divides and creating a more civil and productive discourse.
So that's Ben Shapiro, a complex figure who defies easy categorization.
We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
And maybe even challenged you to think a little more critically about the information you consume and the people you choose to listen to.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Grifter or Gifted.